and elements of what he said and the manner in which he said them that did make things far harder than they should have been. I mean, he said, for instance, in part of that same speech, there will come a day, he said, where the black man holds the whip over the white man. Now, I think that's a terrible thing to say, and I don't think it's come remotely true. And that undoubtedly damaged the whole argument being made on his side. It's the same way, by the way, let me give you another quick example recently. I mean, there's been a debate in Britain that I've been part of on the debate about gay marriage in Britain. And I was saying to somebody I was debating against on this recently, you know, I said, what I'd be really keen on is whatever opposition you, and this particular person was opposed to gay marriage, so whatever you do in it, I hope you can kind of restrain those people on your side who will make your side look ridiculous when they start saying things like, well, in that case you can marry your dog, and things like that. Because you will let down your own argument when, and even things I disagree with, I want the argument to be made at its strongest and its best. And I think that Enoch Powell, to an extent, did make the argument at its worst at that point. But he said something that was true in many important respects. And I think that it's taken a very long time. The poison, the debate which opened up after Rivers of Blood speech is still felt in British politics. There are, about once every couple of years, there is a political career, usually at a nascent stage in a councillor's position or something, ended because they say somewhere, Enoch Powell was right. So it's still the litmus test. But, as I say, I mean, in Enoch Powell's case, in many ways he was right, and in many ways he was wrong. And that makes it a very difficult discussion to base the whole discussion on. And for 4 decades now, we've had it based on Enoch Powell, and that's not where I'd ideally have it.
Lars Knudsen, how do you see your position with the media in your own country? Can you live with this situation, or is it frustrating?
My own position?
Yes.
Oh, I can live with it, obviously. I mean, I do, and make some money from them. So I can't complain entirely. I get given a voice, and I would, by the way, highlight this, that I mean, there are all sorts of problems in the British media, as in other countries' media. We have a total double standard of the kind I was describing earlier. Whereby, for instance, if you said, say, if you're a Conservative councillor who said that Enoch Powell said something that was quite true or something like that, yeah, then the press will make sure that all of that comes back. Whereas if, as somebody who's now a shadow minister, called Diane Abbott, if you said, as she did a few years ago, that your political hero is Mao, then it's all right. You're sort of allowed to get away with it. I did challenge her, I remember, on that. And said, well, what element of it, of the massacre of 60 to 70 million Chinese people, was it that you admired most? But she said that in the end you had to weigh these things up, and that he had led to significant leaps forward in techniques in Chinese agriculture. So there is obviously a very significant double standard in that regard, as in many others. But the crucial one I would cite is that the BBC, for instance, which is the root of a lot of problems in Britain, a lot of problems, undoubtedly, and is undoubtedly one-sided. And let me give you one very quick example. They ran a documentary last year on Geert Wilders. It's called "The Most Dangerous Man in Europe?" ? And when I complained repeatedly and vociferously to the chairman of the BBC, the person who wrote back was one of the commissioners, said in defence that a proof of Geert Wilders' extremism was the fact that he has to be protected by guards. It's what, you know, Churchill said somewhere once. He said, whatever happens, I will never be incapable of discerning the difference between the firefighter and the fire. But much of our media does make that difference. Much of our media mistakes the man standing outside a building with a hose for an arsonist. And that is a problem. I just add one thing, which is that the BBC has in its charter an obligation to put differing sides of an argument. And so I, for instance, do get a good hearing there, pretty good hearing. I tend to be lined up against 4 people who oppose me, but that's all right. The point is, it's bad, but it's not insufferable.
Thank you. Ole? Katrine first. Oh, sorry.
Ladies first.
Thank you for your presentation. I have some question. I know that you have had a discussion with Kenan Malik, who is a critic of multiculturalism, just as you are. And he's actually coming. He's been to Copenhagen once, and he's coming in 2 weeks' time.
To speak to the
To
professor.
speak, not here, no. But I'm just curious to know where you disagree with him on multiculturalism.
Malik's an interesting one. This is Kenan Malik. He wrote a book called From Fatwa to Jihad that I reviewed quite well when it came out. But as always happens, whenever you write even one critical line in a review of someone's book, the only person who ever remembers it is the author, who will bear an unstinting grudge until the end of time. They will never forget it. They will forget anything nice you said and spend the rest of their career trying to destroy you. Anyhow, such is a literary scene in Britain, as I know, I'm sure it is here. But Malik, I said at the time his book came out, is interesting because he is one of those people I would describe who is received with the delight that our societies receive the converted sinner. You know, like the prodigal son. We're so delighted when somebody who has been on the wrong side comes to the right side. Quite often it means you neglect all the people who are on the right side all the time. Or take them for granted. But Malik, to a great extent, has been welcomed as somebody who has seen the light on this. But he is a type of a particularly interesting phenomenon who, whilst ending up being right, doesn't want to be seen to be on the right. So he's the sort of person who would open any discussion, as I've heard him do a number of times, where saying, of course I don't agree with X, Y, Z. So, and he does this in his book. And in fact, he gets it wrong as well. He claimed, for instance, that Mark Stein claimed that Muslims were breeding like mosquitoes, which, as I pointed out, he only needed to read Mark Stein's book to realise was wrong. And then I included the page reference for his interest. Because, of course, it was also laboriously proved, as it should never have had to have been in court in Canada, that the phrase in question was said by Mullah Kreker. And among other things you can tell, because Mark Stein writes beforehand, as Mullah Kreker says, and includes quotation marks, which has generally been regarded as being a sign that it is not you that's written it. Anyhow, punctuational niceties, I'm sure. The point is that he said that sort of thing. He attacked Martin Amis, he does various other things. There's a particular type of person, Malik is typical of, who, as I say, will always do that. They will say, well, of course, I'm not like X. I mean, I may think there's a problem with Islamic fundamentalism, but I don't agree with Martin Amis, as if. So, I always have a very difficult view with people like this, because I think on the one hand one should be grateful that they get the case, but not very grateful that they spend their time, having got it, attacking everyone else who already has. Or as somebody said to me, a left-wing journalist I know in Britain, I said a while ago, I said, you agree with everything I say and I write, and I know whenever we talk about this, you agree with me, but why do you end up, always having to position yourself in such a way that you say, but of course I don't agree with, Douglas Murray or whatever. And he said, you've got to realise it's political positioning. And I said, yeah, I know, it's political positioning against me, so apologies if I'm not hugely grateful. Anyhow, there is such a class of person, I'm sure there are some here, and by the way, all the people who do that, there'll be many, many more in the years ahead. Many of the people in your politics here who are currently saying all sorts of outrageous things about people who've been saying things that have been true for many years. In about 10, 15 years, you know, you won't be able to move in this country for people who were claiming that they were always on the front line in the cartoon war. They will say, I remember in 2005, it was only me standing between, you know, the jihadis and Gillan Poston. I mean, they will do that. They will catch on later, they will rewrite their own histories, and they'll pretend they were right all along. And anyone who actually was right, I don't know, will be forgotten about. They'll trample over.
That reminds me of the very many freedom fighters that were one on the 5th of May 1995. Many more than active participants struggled against Nazism.
Most of France, if I remember.
But do we have any serious questions about that? Yes. And you do? Yes.
Ole Gerstrom, you speak about politicians. Like here in this country, we have a worthy gentleman, Her Majesty's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Willy Søvndal. He stated yesterday regarding the burning out of the Charlie Hebdo magazine in Paris. He said this act was meaningless, a meaningless act. Here he can see the wrath and the power of Allah, who destroys this goddamn magazine, you know, just on the spot, you know, for criticizing Allah and his follower. And so here we have Mr. Søvndal, you know, he sees no meaning in this. Shouldn't we send him to a Quran school, or what would you suggest?
The most consistent idiocy of certainly the last 10 years has been that it has become mainstream to acquiesce in the following line, which comes from much of the Islamic work, which, to summarize, is say my religion is peaceful or I kill you. And a lot of people in public life are simply willing to give themselves as easy a time as possible and go, okay, if that's the deal, I'd rather not get killed. I'll go along with saying it's peaceful, and so on. And I was doing a discussion recently, in a debate in New York against a couple of very, in this particular case, very decent and relatively progressive Muslims, and with my friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali on my side. And it was very interesting because at one point the argument was Islam is the religion of peace, and Ayaan and I were on the other side. May have guessed. And it was very interesting because at one point, you know, they were trying to make their case, and it was just amazing because Ayaan said, you know, the people who are trying to kill me are inspired by the book you keep citing, are inspired by this religion. And in a moment of fatal narcissism, one of our opponents said, utterly truthfully, said, you're not the only person on this panel, Ayaan, that is under death threat. I've got an Al-Qaeda fatwa on my head. And you know, that's, well, hang on. If Islam's such a peaceful